Who's more libertarian, RFK Jr. or Trump? Is being anti-war just a virtue signal? And what should we make of Trump's conviction? We'll discuss these questions and more on today's episode of Good Take, Bad Take. Hey friends, welcome to this episode of the Good Take, Bad Take podcast. This is the show where we gather takes that we see in our social media feeds. We go through them and we critique or praise them based on what we think, and we make arguments for it. And sadly, this will be not our last episode necessarily, but it's an episode before a little bit of a hiatus for us. But I can't think of a better way to close it out than for some nice libertarian inside baseball, which has kind of become outside baseball. I don't know if that's the actual term, but it's kind of become a little bit mainstream. The LNC had its convention where they nominated a candidate this past weekend. And I think the most significant news, though, was not necessarily the candidate, but it was the fact that a lot of other candidates from other major parties, I guess only Donald Trump and then Robert F. Kennedy Jr. showed up to speak. So we'll be going through takes from that, as well as some other takes on, or another take on some of the news that's been happening as of late. So without further ado, let's get into the first of these. We've got Dylan Allman, and he writes, RFK Jr. is significantly more libertarian than Trump. So why are so many people jumping immediately to Trump after the LP didn't nominate their guy? It can't be because they're concerned with electability. They were ready to support the LP. I'm genuinely confused. Can you clear up some of this confusion, Donnie?
I'll clear it up right away. I think this was asked in good faith. I don't think it was hostile, so I wouldn't call it a bad take necessarily. But the clarity here is that when you're considering candidates, you're not just considering in sort of a whose views do I like the most. Like, you're not like taking an I side with quiz online. You're considering a lot of fundamentally multifaceted identities of this, right? Like, sure, as an identity of, does this person agree with all of my views? Does this person agree with the most important views I have? And what is the balance that they have with electability? So for many, I think that, a lot of what RFK Jr. has said sounds good. And on some things, he does sound a lot more libertarian than Trump. But on a lot of things, one, he was really bad until recently and kind of just changed his tune when he was talking to the libertarians. A lot of the things about RFK Jr. Might be that, like, he's further to the right of Donald Trump on Israel-Palestine, it seems, and is proud about that. And that might be a complete turnoff for some libertarians. But I think the biggest factor in my mind is, if we're talking about, let's say I have sort of a Dave Smith candidate, a Mises Caucus candidate, someone who's got all the right views, and they lose to Chase Oliver, who is the current LP nominee, who is a left libertarian who fundamentally disagrees with my worldview, even though we might share a lot of policy agreements. Like, we might share 80% of policy agreements, but our worldviews are fundamentally different when it comes to sort of woke identity politics and things. And that's a pretty big deal. And so I was ready to support a libertarian candidate who shared my worldview, knowing that they weren't going to win. But now, when there's this fundamental shift of I'm not going to be able to support this Libertarian Party nominee because they don't represent me, the next considerations I have are, well, if the person isn't going to represent me well, then I need to choose someone who is going to represent me in a way that is palatable and can win. Because the debate, between voting for Donald Trump and, a good libertarian candidate, for instance, for many of us who are sort of libertarian conservative, is that, you want to vote for the person whose views are right. You want to vote for the principled person, knowing they won't win, trying to convince more people to do that, to get them there eventually, to spread the message. But the strongest factor for someone like Donald Trump has always been electability. And so RFK has none of that appeal. And so it's not like a purity contest between two people who are electable. It's a contest of, well, if Donald Trump is electable and I agree with him, say 40%, and I agree with RFK Jr. like 55%, but he's not electable. Well, what matters to me is the fact that I can support someone who would actually get into office and agree more than like Joe Biden, because electability becomes a much bigger deal when you're not voting on ideological purity. RFK Jr. and Donald Trump are both not libertarians. So then one of the next biggest issues is going to be electability, not to mention specific issues that you might single out. But to me, that's one of the major reasons why you're going to have a mass jump from LP members who are disillusioned with Chase Oliver joining Trump. It's because even if RFK Jr. is maybe technically more libertarian, that's not the calculus anymore once you've left the realms of a principled candidate.
Yeah, and I would even take issue with him being more libertarian in a pragmatic sense, because I think a lot of libertarians think of RFK Jr. as being libertarian and aligning with our views because he has the same enemies that we do. But it's like I just watched on the plane X-Men First Class. I don't know if you ever saw that
I
movie.
like that one, I think.
I
Yeah.
liked it a lot. It was great, and I thought they did a great job with the characters. And the best character is Magneto with Michael Fassbender,
Yeah.
and it's him and Charles Xavier become friends because they have a similar enemy, and it seems like they're going to be pals and everything's going to work out okay, and they're fighting the good fight together. But there's like a really critical juncture where you realize that Magneto actually just wants to have power. He thinks he is better than everyone, and he just hates the bad guy. And that's the only commonality that him and Charles Xavier really have. And that's kind of the way that RFK Jr. is to libertarians. It's like, yeah, he doesn't like the CIA. He doesn't like the medical establishment. Yeah, we agree on vaccines, but his remedy for all that stuff is actually government power. His remedy, I mean, you can see that through his stuff with climate change policies that he wants to do. And he talks about like, oh, I want to remedy it with the free market and stuff. But he wants to remedy it with the free market by providing incentives through the government. And it's like, that's not any better than the opposite way, where you're like penalizing people for whatever types of stuff they're doing in the environment. The other side too, that's just really kind of icky about RFK. Like, I don't know if you listen to Timcast much at all, but he was at the Libertarian Convention. He did an interview with RFK, and he asked him and pressed him on his stance on abortion and how he's kind of flip-flopped, because he at one point was kind of like a little bit more not pro-life, but like, hey, like it should be basically non-existent, like kind of a classic Democrat deal. And then he was like, then I had to change my mind because I went home and my wife and her sisters were criticizing me, saying this and this and this and that. So I changed my position. and then he went out and he said, oh, I support abortion all the way up to the point of birth. And then people got on him again, and then he changed his position again. It's like, dude, like, you obviously have no principle that's guiding you. And because you have no principle that's guiding you, anyone who's in your ear or has your ear right away is the one that's going to sway you. So it's like, yeah, that libertarians and people that hold to that principle should be mainly principle driven. Libertarianism is a principally driven political ideology. It's not based on power. It's not based on trying to win an election. So he's not very libertarian in that way. And then, like you were saying, like if we're considering, like, if I can't get the guy that is going to spread the message, because the LP is never going to win an election in 2024, barring something absolutely insane. Then the next best person is someone who can message what we're saying properly. If we can't have someone that's going to message what we want to say and do it in a great way, which Chase Oliver can't because he doesn't represent our views, then the next best person is the person that's going to get most of or some of what we enjoy, as well as just giving kind of the finger to the political establishment. And that's Trump. It's like my third or fourth or fifth even like choice. But he is better than RFK hands down, because at least he can win, like you were saying. And at least if he wins, he might be able to implement some of the things that we enjoy, even if it's not based on the principles that we hold dearly.
Yeah, and I would just sort of preempt, just for anyone who's not aware, Chase Oliver is a left libertarian, and he's not shy about that. I mean, he kind of hit it during his campaign, but he's very much in the mindset of identity politics, of following the COVID regime, not necessarily endorsing state mandates, but being proud to show his compliance with them, no skepticism, falling in line, supporting the idea that businesses should have vaccine mandates for themselves individually. Whether or not you think that they can have them, whether they should is a different matter. And so, just to preempt, it's like, where do your principles go just because your guy didn't win? It's like, no, my principled vote only works when the guy stands for the right principles, and in the same way that you were talking with RFK, sort of having mutual enemies. That's how I feel about with Chase Oliver. Like, we might have 80% of similar policy solutions, but if my vote isn't principled when it's voting for someone whose worldview is so fundamentally altered and different, and then someone might say, well, you should help the Libertarian Party pragmatically, but then we're talking about pragmatics versus pragmatics. And I think in a year where there's a lot at stake, and Donald Trump is no means good or perfect, but there's reasons you would support him pragmatically more than, say, help the LP achieve 5% that it's never going to achieve with such a bad candidate.
Yeah. So. All right, moving on to our next one. We've got Austin Peterson and another Twitter user or
These
X
are,
user.
by the way, these are just separate, but they are the
Yeah.
same sentiment. So I
Yeah.
lumped them together.
Yeah, they're good in that way, in that examples of this position. So Austin Peterson writes, right libertarians in the Libertarian Party told us that being anti-war is the most important thing. Chase Oliver is undoubtedly extremely anti-war and is pledged to end the genocide, quote, in Gaza. If being anti-war is the most important thing, surely that means Oliver is worthy of support, right? Unless being anti-war is not the most important thing. Anti-war is a virtue signal, not an intellectual position, in the exact same way leftist soccer moms virtue signal with the Ukraine flag in their bios. Show me an anti-war libertarian, and I'll show you someone who's advocated for throwing a commie or two out of a helicopter, endorsed the CIA's hit on Che Guevara, or openly rooted for KGB agent and assassin Vladimir Putin. And then this other Twitter user is writing separately, same sentiment. Dave Smith is making a post-convention media tour telling everyone that war and peace is his number one issue. And even though Chase Oliver is excellent on that precise issue, he refuses to support him because of culture war issues they disagree on. Then war is not your number one issue, hypocrite. What do you think?
Okay, so I kind of jumped the gun on previewing my point here. I kind of forgot I'd thrown this in, but that's what I'm talking about. Is one, it's very stupid to say that if you have a number one issue, therefore everything else adding up behind it
Yep.
is not to be factored in. Like that's so stupid. Like if like my number one issue, for instance, was abortion, and you have a great candidate who is totally against abortion, and then says, but I want to bomb everyone overseas, I want to raise your taxes, and I want to make sure that you're enslaved to the government through like them taking over all of the industries. Like, doesn't matter, because that's a lot bigger of and more radical of a change that actually matters. It's like again, candidates are 3D or live in a 3D world. It's not just a game of, oh, number one's aligned, therefore nothing else matters. And to that point, I also don't think that Chase Oliver is excellent on war. I think he's okay on war. I don't think he's excellent. I think that a lot of his messaging lacks the why behind some of his positions. And so, sure, again, we might be in technical alignment on the issue, but unless he can articulate why, for instance, we shouldn't be involved in Ukraine and Russia, I don't think that I don't think that it's good enough to just say, well, we should be out, and that's how you should represent the views. Is you need to understand the US provoked this through our foreign intervention and meddling. And yes, like we don't support uninitiated acts of aggression, and Russia invading Ukraine in a militaristic way was terrible, but we also have to understand that was provoked through a series of historical events leading up to NATO pushing its borders, expanding eastward, denying sovereignty to those countries that wanted to leave Ukraine and rejoin Russia, and all these things. And it feels like his anti-war position on a lot of things, from what I've heard, is just sort of like, well, I know the libertarian talking point, and that's what I'm going to go to. And to me, again, if you're the candidate of the party, you need to have that philosophical understanding from the root and the context to be able to explain it. And that's why, even though Chase Oliver is the head of the ticket, Dave Smith is still going to be the libertarian thought leader, because he can articulate those issues so well to people and give that historic context and convince people. And that's more important than any other individual de facto position about being anti-war, is being able to convince people of that. And so if you can't convince people of it in a convincing way, and you're bad on a host of other issues, then yeah, it can be your number one position. You can technically agree. It doesn't mean that it's going to win your support, though.
It's also like, it's kind of dishonest, because it's like, okay, so you're saying that Trump isn't good on war. He might not be, but he's saying the same things that Chase Oliver is saying. So it's
Right.
like you've got two candidates who have essentially from their mouths the same exact talking points, or very, very close to it. But one of them is terrible on every other issue in the culture war, and the other one is like bad on some of it, but also okay on other aspects of the culture war. So it's like, yeah, when faced with that, just because it's my number one, then I drop to my number two. And if the number two is not very good, then it's like, okay, I'm going to look at the other person that has the most congruent and solid position across the border that aligns with my worldview. And like you were saying in the previous take, that also like satisfies the multiple strategic objectives that I might have with using my vote. The other thing too, like you're saying, that I just take issue with is like, hey, just because something is your number one doesn't mean that it's mutually exclusive in terms of your consideration for every other issue that they have positions on. Like, my main objective in this material world might be to take care of my family and make sure that my daughter grows up safely, that is, she's well fed, that my wife is safe and is well fed, and everyone is taken care of. And if a candidate says, hey, like, I will satisfy that number one condition, but I'm also going to bomb the crap out of all your neighbors, it's like, well, okay, like, suddenly I can't support you. Like, it doesn't, like, and then people in Austin Peterson's world, he's like, well, he satisfies your number one issue, so why aren't you supporting him? It's like, well, that's not, just because of a number one issue doesn't mean that it's the only thing that's important or the only thing that adds up to a decision about whether I should support someone or not. And Austin Peterson, I think, is just he's doing this dishonest take because he kind of got destroyed on his position on Gaza by Dave Smith. So
yeah, he's been on a butthurt tour.
He has been, and I think he was happy to see this happen because he wanted to, obviously see the Mises Caucus and Dave Smith types lose. But in some ways, they really had a huge win. So I mean, we'll get to that in a minute. But
yeah, and the last thing I'll say is it's massive projection to say, show me an anti-war libertarian, and I'll show you someone who's advocated for throwing a commie out of a helicopter, CIA's hit on Che Guevara, KGB agent and assassin. Like, maybe those were your positions, and like maybe Joshua Smith, but he was not the Mises Caucus candidate for a reason. And and that's not the majority of anti-war libertarians. I think that the commie out of a helicopter is a meme more than anything else. So it feels super disingenuous for that to be like, oh, your actual position. It's like, okay, all right, get over yourself, Austin.
All right, moving on to our next one. We've got Clint Russell. He is reposting Chase Oliver. So Chase Oliver in January 8th of 2021, when Donald Trump was banned, wrote, "Bye, real Donald Trump, glad you were banned. Hashtag sorry, not sorry. Hashtag accountability. Hashtag 25th Amendment now." And then Clint Russell reposted this saying, "The FBI/DHS and CDC were dictating censorship guidelines to Twitter at this time. That is a violation of the First Amendment and is unconstitutional. It was and is illegal. I oppose his banning and still do. Not all libertarians are retarded, just the ones we run for president are." What do you think about Clint's take?
I think Clint has the right take here, and this, along with, and for anyone interested, I don't think I posted any of them. You can look at Chase Oliver's previous tweets on COVID and during the COVID restrictions. Those are another massive. Actually, no. You know what? We have ones on other issues, but not COVID in here. But go look at those. To me, this is one of those things where it also it shows the fundamental worldview that is going to give you wisdom or not. It's almost sort of the red pill, and I hate how much red pill has become this machismo
the manosphere
online manosphere space. That's not its origin or original concept. Red pill just meaning you understand that narratives are carefully constructed to deceive you, and the world around you is as it would be told you by a lot of powerful institutions. So just being not everything's a conspiracy, but there are a lot of conspiracies. Conspiracies happen. Not everything is one, but there's a lot. Anyway, and this is one of those things where it shows that Chase Oliver doesn't have the wisdom and that discernment to know that, like, Donald Trump being banned on Twitter was a bad thing. And it's like, you could, at the time, you may not have known for a fact that Twitter was in collusion, but it was very clear that the establishment was working to get him off of there, regardless of how they did it. He made it easier for them because he's not a principled dude and he runs his mouth and he's ridiculous in a lot of ways. But the justifications to get there were clearly misconstrued. And when you look at the Twitter files, when you look at that, you saw the federal government going in, and where Twitter tried to push back and say, actually, this doesn't technically violate our guidelines, the federal government came in and said, change your guidelines. And so then they did that. And so there's a lot of things where clearly shutting down more speech rather than allowing is bad. And you don't, even if you think it's right that Twitter has the right, even if they did it not in a way that violated an amendment, you shouldn't celebrate that. You shouldn't cheer on that kind of thing. You should want a culture of free speech. And then second, you should have the wisdom to divine, like, I don't know that something's going on here, but I have a pretty strong inclination that this is not a good thing because the powers that be really are pushing for this. And when you don't have those things, you make for a bad candidate who again has a fundamentally different worldview than someone like you or I think.
Yeah. People, there's that saying that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And, when, and the meaning behind that is that, like, hey, if someone makes a claim about something that seems pretty outlandish, like, they better provide something that is really, really strong proof of that thing. And that's kind of a way to hone your instinct to be like, hey, this person might be deceiving me. And it's a good way to remain skeptical of things that you should be skeptical of. And like you're saying, like, when all of the people that are enemy number one for us, the people that obviously have no principle, that don't operate from a principle, and that are used to deceiving us or trying to attempt to deceive us, that clearly want to grab power through deception, and through illegal acts and things that are not right or good or in service of free speech or the values that they purport to hold. When they're all in alignment about something, even if I don't have any evidence for one way or the other, or I can't make a claim one way or the other, it makes me kind of squint a little bit, because I'm like, oh, okay, something here is not right. And I think that's like key. That's like a key characteristic of any libertarian. And that's the reason why people like Dave Smith and Tom Woods and a lot of other folks in the Libertarian Party were able to have a good view on the COVID stuff. Even if they didn't have all the data right away, they were able to look at all of the peripheral, maybe intangible data and anecdotal evidence, and just kind of read the room and be like, hey, something here doesn't seem right. I'm going to remain skeptical of it. And they were able to arrive at the correct conclusion just through those powers of discernment. And anyone that doesn't have that power of discernment is almost guaranteed to be wrong on those issues into the future. And that's why Chase Oliver is such a bad candidate, is because on all the most important stuff of the past 4 years, he's had the exact wrong instinct on. And that's not to say, like with Austin Peterson stuff, that he might have some good views on things that we do care about, but things that were very, very important that directly related to us immediately, he had the wrong instincts on. And time again, he was able to be deceived by these elites and by the establishment media. And that's just not a really good thing to, as Clint Russell puts it, not all libertarians are retarded, just the ones we run for president.
Exactly.
All right, moving on to our next one. Oh man, this, did you add the little annotations in there?
No. So that this is Michael Mouse just replied to himself, but I just fit it this way by copying.
Oh my goodness, it's so funny. So Michael Malice tweets the Rob Henderson rule libertarian edition. So Rob Henderson's rule is step 1, it's not really happening. Step 2, yeah, it's happening, but it's not a big deal. Step 3, it's a good thing actually. And step 4, people freaking out about it are the real problem. Kind of illustrating the slippery slope of moral depravity among things like, gay marriage or trans stuff or anything like that. And so Michael Malice posts that, and then he also posts a picture of Chase Oliver. 4 posts by Chase Oliver. So the first one is in April of 2022, and it's about transing the kids. No one is actually doing this. Good on you for standing up for something that doesn't happen. You know what does happen? Trans and non-binary young people are mercilessly bullied and their parents painted as abusers. That actually happens, and we should speak out against it. So you got step 1 right there. It's not really happening. Step 2, how many trans non-binary kids do you think are in the US? How many are on puberty blockers? Do you think this is a widespread thing being pushed on our kids? That's not very far away. That's November of 2022. So yeah, it's happening, but it's not that big of a deal. Step 3, why does the New York Post and Fox News show stories about the many thousands of trans or non-binary youth who feel better after being able to socially transition in schools? Because it would ruin the narrative that every public school teacher is forcing your kids to be trans. AKA, it's happening, but it's actually a good thing. Yep. And then moving on, he writes, this is shameful. I am old enough to remember when gay rights were used as a wedge issue. Now the right has moved on to targeting trans and non-binary people. It's sad and happening in states across the country. Also known as step 4, people freaking out about it are the real problem. What do you think?
Just a perfect illustration of how you can chart this out. And just to, before I get in, first of all, the libertarian edition is a joke because the VP candidate, who's also pretty pathetic, has misspelled libertarian in his Twitter handle and has not changed it. He's going to have his team figure it out because he cannot figure out how to do it, and it's been like 2 days.
Very boomer.
pretty embarrassing there. But also a second thing before I jump in, Rob Henderson, the guy who outlines that, really interesting dude. I think we featured some of his takes on here before. I'm really excited. I have his book. I think it's a biography. Um, I'm really excited to read that. So highly recommend his stuff if you're not following him. But yeah, this is the kind of reasoning that someone, again, who lacks discernment and judgment is going to show, and that's the reason why we can't support this guy. When it comes to the transing kid issue, this is just the microcosm of how people try to rationalize in their head. The people who want to defend this behavior rarely are confronted with the data in a way that they stop and actually think and reconsider. They're so defensive about it. I remember there was an interview. I don't remember who was asking the questions, but it was someone did a side of the road interview with right outside of a hospital that was like across the way that was actually transing kids. And so he's like, hey, what do you think that hospitals should be allowed to transition kids under the age of 12? And the first thing is, they're not doing that. And he's like, no, they're actually doing that. Well, they're not doing that around here. He's like, no, they're doing it across the street over there. He's like, well, it's not for kids under 13. Like, yeah, no, it's for kids under 13. They actually have done that. He's like, well, it's not a big deal. They have, as long as they're consenting and fine. And he's like, well, a lot of them are under the age of consent. And he's like, no, it helps them out a lot. So it didn't matter. First, it wasn't happening. And it's just, no matter what, if you have this preconceived notion of what is tolerant, what is tolerable, and what is socially acceptable, you're not going to actually think through your position. And so the moment you're challenged, you just retreat into all these other back steps, and you try to sort of throw the book at the opposition rather than engaging with the actual argument. And so the fact that Chase Oliver not only has defended the idea of kids transitioning and being put on puberty blockers, the fact that Chase Oliver hasn't even thought through it well enough to have a coherent position on whether or not it's happening, whether or not it's a good thing, whether or not they should. Like, it's wild that you would take such a strong stance. And it's part of his collectivist ideology, because he, as a gay man, often starts out with as a gay man or as part of the LGBTQ community. And when you talk in those terms, you adopt groupthink ideologies without coming to those conclusions on your own. It'd be like, for instance, if you asked me about, again, let's use the war in Ukraine as an example. Should we be involved in Ukraine? I would say no. It's not in our interests. It's a war of aggression that we've pushed on to Russia. And I wouldn't say, as a libertarian, my view is, oh, no, that's a stupid way to start out. Now, you might clarify things, you might, to help show your view, but when you start from that perspective and offering that as your answer, it's a bad look, and it leads to this kind of situation where you just have to keep justifying and rationalizing and finding any argument you can that is necessarily contradictory to the others.
Yeah, one of the things that I've kind of taken away from the LNC like the Libertarian Convention, is that like like bad behavior, like we Solzhenitsyn talked about like how in the Soviet Union everyone was responsible for what happened because they had some sort of compromise, whether it was large or small, in their life that led to a lie being able to be perpetuated until eventually you were under arrest and thrown in a gulag. And I think that like bad behavior necessitates, like, I'm not saying it always does, but bad behavior and not living according to a moral principle that is based in reality, and from your and I's perspective is based in the Bible and in Christianity, like that necessitates a demand for more and more government. Like, if you actually want to shrink the government in the way that you have the most power to do, it's by you living a good and independent moral life on your own and making sure that you produce more than you consume. All these things, if everyone in America did that, you would shrink the government without having any sort of violence, without any political rallies, because there would be no demand for any of these services at all, or any of these intrusions. But because people are not moral, suddenly there's like a demand and an outcry for people to make these decisions and have people that can oversee it and do all this stuff, which is the government. And you see that in the Bible, which is really funny. Like, the Israelites are like, hey, we're being so immoral, like we need a king to tell us what is right or wrong. And God's like, hey, like, if you do that, they're going to rule over and you're going to be slaves and it's going to suck. It would be better for you to become moral on your own than to do that. And they're like, no, we need it. And then begins the age of just complete suffering for Israel of the Bible. So it's like when I see things like Chase Oliver saying these things, like, one, like you and I have a pretty clear and articulate way and worldview of articulating why this is bad and immoral and wrong. Chase Oliver has immoral desires and operates from an immoral worldview, but he doesn't have any way for articulate to why he can stand behind that worldview. And like you're saying, when you don't have an actual principle or an argument for something, for a position that you hold, this is typically the flow that you go through, especially when it's on a cultural issue. You first try and say that's not happening. You say that's happening, but it's not a big deal. That's actually a good thing. It's what we should be supporting. And actually, you're the problem for freaking out about it. And you can notice within those 4 steps, no argument for the behavior has actually ever been made. It's just been a way of projecting and flipping the site of making an action or making an argument back onto the person who's already made an argument. And so this is, Chase Oliver is such a bad candidate especially for a libertarian candidate, because he has an inherently anti-liberty worldview, which he can't even defend himself. And that just really sucks. So this is, Michael Malice's tweets about the LNC have been insanely funny as of late. So I encourage anyone to go look at them, because anything that's funny has usually a kernel of truth in it. And this is definitely one of those good ones.
Definitely. Can't recommend his Twitter enough.
All right. Moving on to our next one. We got Tho Bishop, and he writes about the events of the LNC. The Mises Caucus's goal of keeping the Ron Paul revolution alive was always laudable. The issue was always its focus on using the LP as the platform for it, for reasons that should have been made clear this past weekend. Right now, Dave Smith is doing what leaders do, taking more blame than they deserve when a project fails. But the reality is that in the last few years, he's become the undisputed leader of the libertarian movement. The fact he is not the LP presidential nominee does not change that. How insignificant that position really is undoubtedly played a role in his decision not to pursue it. It provided no value to his ability to serve as a communicator. Its only meaning would have been to cement the Mises Caucus's control over the party. One of the strengths of the Mises Caucus in the past few years was having relatively sober views on what a third party can truly accomplish. While I've always been skeptical of the value the LP provides in a decentralized revolution, focusing on local level seats, it did reflect a recognition of the LP's limits at bigger level races. It was the willingness to consider using the LP as a leverage point against the 2 main parties that have always been far more interesting. This weekend was the ultimate win in this book. Trump came into a predictably hostile crowd and offered 2 major appeals: free Ross and defend the crypto industry from severe escalation and hostility from the Democrats. Save a soul and benefit your wallet. Trump is not a libertarian, and the opinion of D. Roy Murdoch doesn't change that. But Trump was making a clear transactional offer to a voting base that he sees as valuable. Dave Smith deserves most of the credit for that view in 2024. Unfortunately, the LNC is clearly the worst platform to make this sort of pitch. The majority of the crowd necessarily consisted of people who are pot committed to a third-party project, and the existence of the party itself is threatened by any offer to move votes to a major party. At the peak of the Ron Paul movement, there would have been a viable alternative to speaking to libertarians. Various organizations used to hold conferences that brought in thousands. Unfortunately, 2016 created a bust in the liberty political bubble. Since then, it has been Dave that has effectively become the leader of the liberty movement. His interest in the LP project is what made it the center of the libertarian sphere. Going forward, I hope there's a serious consideration for another path. It doesn't necessarily mean that the taking up of red hats, but it does require us identifying whether or not past decisions on strategic means are viable options to achieve ends. Despite the fact that libertarian political infrastructure is in a far worse state than it was 8 years ago, there are reasons for optimism for those who want to see them. This year, there are several Ron Paul Republicans with great chances to enter Congress. Some obvious examples include Dr. Ricker Becker in North Dakota, Jones for Liberty in South Carolina, and Anthony Sabatini in Florida. In Arizona, Blake Masters and Abraham Hamada were both Ron Paul guys, and they are unfortunately duking out in a solid red district.
One
it's
more.
a long one, but
Next
tell me
slide.
what you think. Oh, next slide.
Yep. This
Okay.
is just the last bit of it.
Got it. Next slide. Meanwhile, in Congress, you have a number of Republicans signing on to Representative Thomas Massey's End the Fed bill. Matt Gaetz has consistently led the charge on a number of legislative priorities for libertarians and has no problems going after the same Republican leaders that libertarians despise. Most importantly, the crypto industry has developed serious political clout at all levels of government, including Senator Loomis, who regularly touts the Bitcoin Standard as a must-read book. All of these green shoots have one common point. They come from one side of the aisle. There will always almost certainly be issues of major disagreement, but the focus is on sound money and peace. There are far more options today than there were in 2016. And this doesn't even begin to factor in the state level victories, like real T.J. Roberts beating a former state House member with 50 points, or the heroic work that's being done in New Hampshire. Going forward, we need to recreate a political infrastructure that results in viable political victories. Hopefully, this past week can show the limitations of packaging any such initiative as a part of a third party.
Okay, so this is a lot of heavy analysis. So I'll try to break down a couple of highlights from it. The first thing that I think he gets wrong, I think this is good, interesting analysis, right? Like, even if I disagree with points, I think that this is really thought provoking and deep. So good on though. He's an interesting guy. Um, the first thing is that I completely disagree with his thought on the Libertarian Party presidential candidate being unimportant and minuscule in promoting the message. I don't think that at all played into Dave Smith's consideration. I think what played into Dave Smith's consideration is the fact that he had a young child who had to be hospitalized. He has a young family that he needs to be there for. And this is not a great period of his life for this kind of inflexibility that that specific position offers. He also has a massive platform. Now this is more to Tho's point. He has an existing massive platform that he can use to leverage the liberty message. But I don't think that downplays the importance of the presidential ticket, because normies, when they look up libertarian, and this has always been Dave Smith's point, when they look up libertarian, there is a third party, the third party in America with that name in the title. And they're necessarily going to look to who they're running as a candidate. That is a huge deal. And that is a huge amount of influence and recognition that is going to be given to the name libertarian, whether you like it or not. The candidate and the party is going to take that. And so I completely disagree with those writing off of that position. And I think that, unfortunately, the fact is that the Mises Caucus focus on local races meant that when they thought Dave Smith was going to run, there weren't the kinds of people prepping for this to begin with. It's kind of like the whole irony of, the best people who should be politicians are the people who don't want it. And so then they don't run. And so then you get the bad people who want it, who run. And that's kind of the situation I think that happened with the Mises Caucus in many ways. And that's how we ended up kind of with a subpar candidate in Michael Rechtenwald. No hard feelings to him personally or anything, but he was not the best messenger, and he was not the best candidate. And so all of that being said, I think the position matters a great deal, for especially in a year like this where, there's so many things going on that need that commentary that to capture what's actually going on in this. The Republicans want to use the exact same power of the state that's putting them in the predicament that they're in right now. And the Democrats, of course, are blaming inflation on corporations, not looking at the very fact that Joe Biden's the one printing the money right now. So there's so many opportunities that the person who is the de facto leader of the libertarian movement by title would get, that even if Dave Smith is the leader of the libertarian thought, the mainstream media doesn't necessarily track with that. They're going to look at who's the guy with the name. So that's kind of my first thing that I think undermines the rest of his case here, which is that I think that it is important. You can still be the thought leader, but having the Libertarian Party presidential candidate gives you an air of authority that we as libertarians may not think is important, but the outside world who doesn't live in the political bubble does. And so I think that Tho is maybe suffering a little bit from insider perspective, even though I think he's one of the people who's better about thinking things from a cultural outside the box perspective. But to me, I think that he's so emphasizing on the outside the box cultural perspective on things like events, rallies, thought leaders, that he's missing the forest for the trees a little bit.
Yeah, it's like, I don't think that Dave Smith's ability to become if Dave Smith had run and he had become the nominee, like, I think there's definitely a chance that maybe the Libertarian Party would have become undeniable in terms of its ability to be on the stage making points. I think Michael Malice talked about how he thought, he's like, hey, if Dave had run, Michael Malice thinks that he would have been able to get Dave Smith onto the debate stage. Whether or not
Yeah.
that's true or not, it's definitely more true than it is with Chase Oliver,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And not only that, like the Libertarian Party should not exist to be as people kind of view it still as Republicans, but they like pot and gay marriage.
Yep.
Like that's how people have traditionally viewed it. And we elected or we nominated a candidate that is basically that. Like libertarians, the Mises Caucus project was to make libertarians something actually different and distinct from the Republicans and the Democrats with actual ability to criticize the right from the right and the left from the left. And Dave Smith was definitely the best person for that. And there were other people as well that could have been it, but that messaging would have only been enhanced by them becoming one of them becoming the candidate. So yeah, I agree with you that Tho's kind of wrong on that. I also kind of support Dave Smith not running, based on his desire for his family and everything like that. In some ways, is living a very libertarian lifestyle in that you're like choosing your family and family values over political power. It's just like you're saying, it's the double-edged sword. The people that are best for it also have reasons that are really good and admirable for not doing it, and then the people that don't have good reasons end up doing it. The other aspect of this, though, that I do like about Tho's take is there's this concept in product development called job to be done. And a lot of times when there's industries or there's process and procedures in a company or jobs that are being done, when you're developing technology to help those folks, the actual job that needs to be done and accomplished, the actual strategic win can get obscured. And we start thinking that like technology is an ends of and of itself. And so, for example, like if you were I mean, this is a classic one. Like Henry Ford wrote that if I built what people wanted me to build, I would have built a faster horse and buggy. But instead I figured out what people really want is they want to get from point A to point B. I'm going to create the best possible way for them to get from point A to point B. But a lot of times people get caught up in what the current technology is and think that it has to fit within that framework. And so that is the problem with some of the libertarian stuff, is that like, oh, we think that the way to get from from where we're at today to liberty, as some of the less desirable folks in the party say, liberty within our lifetimes or free world in our lifetimes, which is not going to happen. They think the Libertarian Party is the only vessel for that. But it's like, hey, there's actually been some really successful things that have happened outside of the Libertarian Party. And like Phil was saying, the Libertarian Party has been used as a wedge. Like, I think it's probably the most culturally significant moment in the Libertarian Party that a major candidate came and literally begged, like put up with people booing him. So Trump doesn't let people boo him like at events. Like he came, he begged, he let them boo him. He took the punishment just so he could literally ask, which was hilarious, for the Libertarian Party's nomination. He's like, make me your nominee. Like that was so freaking funny when that happened. As well as, and then he's like, if you're not going to nominate me, then at least vote for me. Like that's a really huge deal. And it made him commit to, whether or not he actually does it, but at least he committed to, pardoning Ross Ulbricht, as well as some of the stuff with the crypto industry and everything. And so it's like, hey, there's like some actual like skin in the game. It's actually a way for libertarian points to be put out into the world, because it's like, hey, like you got concessions from a candidate, or at least you were considered big enough of a threat and big enough of a voice in the world that someone feels like they have to come speak to you. At least two of the three kind of largest candidates in the presidential race thought that. I think if Biden was somewhat senile, he would have been able to come and he would have wanted to appeal to libertarians in some way, but there's no way they're putting up on a stage in front of a hostile crowd. That is definitely an argument for Trump. It's like, man, he went in there very hostile and was able to kind of pull out somewhat of a win for himself. And some of that is an unforced error from libertarians. But yeah, like liberty isn't constrained just to the libertarians and have to be through the Libertarian Party. It's like, hey, Dave Smith has made the point about supporting Blake Masters in Arizona. It's like, hey, if we have the choice between some crazy war hawk that has also terrible views on all the culture issues and then kind of a more Ron Paul guy, we're going to go with the Ron Paul guy, even though he doesn't have a libertarian, L next to his name. It's like we can leverage saying like, hey, we will vote for you if you do these things. And that actually results in liberty. That's a very pragmatic approach. And to me, like Tho was saying, like those types of options and that type of leverage didn't exist in 2016, but it exists today. And that makes me optimistic for the future, even though we have a candidate as bad as Chase Oliver as the libertarian candidate.
Yeah. And I'll add just to wrap up thoughts on, he with the sort of concession, and leverage that we do offer. I also do think that a lot of that is because it's there is a political party, it's one thing to have a strain of an idea exist and need to appeal to those ideas, broadly speaking, but it's a lot harder to make that into a voting bloc that you're giving concessions to. And that's one of the things where the Libertarian Party as a vehicle is useful. So getting concessions from Trump only really works when there's a voting bloc that he identifies as people who are he has to win over. It's not just like people who are, it's not like paleocons. Like paleocons exist. Paleo conservatives are a real type of conservative out there, but you'd never have to go to the paleocon, some conference that agrees with them and try to win that block over. It's not nearly as organized and strategic as going to like the Libertarian National Convention, where libertarians who want to vote for a libertarian candidate are there, and you can appeal to them directly to take their votes. All of that, he credits Dave Smith, and Dave Smith should be credited, but you also have to credit Angela McArdle, the chair of the LP, who organized the whole thing to get the candidates there, to get these concessions from Trump or whatever. So even when it comes to having sway in local races and that kind of thing as an option, that's what the Libertarian Party could do. I like your product development idea, because it's one of those things where historically the LP has seen we have to win seats and that's the only way we can affect change. But no, if you can use that as a wagering, if you can use that as a bartering, be innovative with the political party, be innovative with the seats, run where you can run and win, but also leverage where you can leverage. And it's like yes and with the party, in my opinion. But I think that the party infrastructure is helpful and important to have. And the problem with though is that he talks about the fact that, oh, well, there's all these great things happening in Republican, with Liberty Republicans. That's true. That's also a vast minority of the Republican movement and project there. I don't know that, if you break up the Libertarian Party and put all that energy into the Republican project, you make that much more of a dent. Whereas if you actually can succeed with this LP takeover, which it feels like we're on the cusp of, and, maybe we won't get there, but I think we will, then you actually have that party that is going to exist either way, filled with people who actually are spreading a good message. If you all abandon it, then the name Libertarian becomes soiled, tarnished, and you have to rebrand. You have to get these ideas out in a different way, and that's a lot harder of a thing to do.
Yeah. All right. This is our last one, and it happened today, which we're speaking on May 30th of 2024, and Donald Trump was just convicted, I think was it 34 counts for the hush money payments to Stormy Daniels. Man, just what a funny thing. And Jack Posobiec writes, "Are you on the side of Trump or the regime? Which one are you? Are you with me or are you against me?"
If I have to pick here, I have to pick Trump. But he is part of the regime is the problem. Yeah. He appointed the regime. He surrounded himself with the regime. The problem is the regime hates him too. And so they want to get him. But candidly speaking, this is not the moment to say, oh, Republicans and Democrats are the same. Clearly, this is a moment to recognize that this is the regime weaponizing itself against Donald Trump, who I don't think isn't the regime, but he's not the regime they like. And this is absolutely a political moving and gunning in on things that, frankly, are criminal charges that are so under what actual presidents have done and done explicitly, let alone the crimes they've committed implicit or not implicitly, but like under wraps and behind closed doors. The absolute just, I don't know, clown show that this is cannot be understated. It is so unbelievably transparent that this was orchestrated from the start. And I think that this is going to motivate a lot of people who are on the fence to vote for Trump. It has made me so much more sympathetic with him because, again, I don't think Trump was a good president. I don't think Trump has done many things right. I think he was terrible on a lot. But like, we're now past the point of no return where the justice system has basically explicitly been used against political foes. And we're in a whole new world for the United States.
Yeah. Yep. Trump is definitely part of the regime, but he has people should view the whole thing that's going on there. Like Trump will say things like they're really after you, but I'm just in the way. Like that's not actually the case. I mean, it is in some ways, depending on how you look at it, but like Trump is part of the regime, did many of the same things that the regime did, was motivated by many of the same things that the regime did, is motivated by power, but he just happens to end up on the good side of things every now and then. And, he has more in common with all the folks there than he does with us. And it should be viewed more as like a civil war within that. And they don't like him, not because they have some sort of like moral high ground or they have some principle that he violates that they just cannot abide by. They don't like him because he kind of reveals what they all are, which is just awful, depraved lunatics that are completely, full of ego and are bloodthirsty and awful and sexually depraved and all these things. Like everything that they criticize Trump of is just a mere reflection, a projection of what a lot of these elites are. And like you were saying, it's just so funny to me. It's like, hey, Trump got convicted of, it's a felony for paying hush money to, a porn star. It's like, okay, like you don't have like these like abuses of power with Bill Clinton, like literally things we know happened. We know happened. People have been not charged with stuff. Obama literally killed a U.S. citizen without a trial. It's like all these different types of things have occurred under other U.S. presidents, but they're not. And Trump, to be fair, Trump, and the reason we say he's part of the regime is because he did many of the same things, but they are not going to try to get him on those things, because if they get him on those things, it opens it up for them to be gotten on their things that are just as bad or worse. So they had to do these weird novel legal theories and crazy stuff and have him prosecuted in the state of New York under a judge who has literally a daughter that works for the DNC. It's like, yeah, that is complete and utter horse crack. Like, it's just not actual. Like, it's really is a kangaroo court of like in definition. Like these folks, go for it.
Well, their star witness was admitted in court to having like lied in the past as well.
Lied and having a personal vendetta against Trump.
Yes, it's crazy because, again, it would be one thing if all of these things were true and then there was not consensus. But also, some of the charges did not even have to be unanimously agreed upon of what he did wrong. So there were certain aspects of it they all had to unanimously agree, but there were certain charges where if they all sort of had a plurality, they all agreed differently, then it would count. That's what the judge told the jury before they broke. And it comes back with all of this shaky star witness, shaky situations, and what do you know? All 34 counts, he's guilty. Shocking. Just shocking. The other thing I just want to say before we close, this is one of those scenarios like that I was referring earlier with like Chase on COVID and Chase on Twitter, where you might look and think, technically speaking, Donald Trump may have broke the law. But when you look at the world around and you see that all of the institutions were going for this, all of the wrong people are celebrating right now, that should make you, like you said, it should make you, squint a little bit. It should make you take a pause and realize, like when you look and you see John Bolton tweeting, today's verdict is a fire bell in the night. The Republican Party now has one last chance to change course and not nominate a convicted felon for president.
Oh my goodness.
Then you know, like this, something is off here. And so I can't definitively tell you he didn't do these things or that he shouldn't be charged in an empirical sense, but we don't live in a world where it's just the paper. It's just the on paper. Did he commit crime? Yes, he gets punished. We live in a world of 3D, real world politics, and this is clearly a political stunt that was orchestrated to try to get him out. And I don't know. I think that anyone who instantly hears, oh well, he's a convicted felon, therefore he's guilty and wrong, I shouldn't vote. Well, think about it a little bit. Think about the circumstances, look into the oddities surrounding it, and recognize that whatever conclusion you come to, you are being led to a conclusion by the media. You are being led to have a specific perspective and to think in a certain way very clearly by all of the powerful institutions around. Now, you can still come to the same conclusion, but I don't want you to just automatically get there and think one way or the other because of the pundits, because of what Britt or I are saying, because of that. Like, go through the steps and just consider how we got to where we are and whether or not it seems just. Because I think when you look on it, again, I don't like Donald Trump. I think he has done a lot of things that are illegal. I think he's probably guilty of these things by the books. But when you drag these things out, when you time them in this way, when you stack the books in a certain way, it is clearly a broader move than bringing quote unquote justice to this one guy. That is not what this is about.
Yeah.
And you have to make sure that you yourself aren't being played the fool and playing the part of a useful idiot in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, like I was saying earlier, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and I think it's pretty incredible in a lot of ways that, like, obviously Donald Trump's life has probably been under the most tiniest and sensitive of microscopes in terms of looking for all sorts of ways to get him that wouldn't also implicate, the folks that are on the other side of it. And you and I think having an affair with a porn star, Trump denies it happened, but whether or not it did, it seems somewhat consistent with his character. I think that that type of behavior is abhorrent and awful and terrible. It's also probably, like, in terms of the atrocities committed by all of the people that have been president, probably pretty far down on the list. And so if that's the thing they're going to get him on, there's a whole other list of things that we should be getting other folks on. And I think it's kind of speaks volumes as to, like, that's the thing they chose, right? Like, it's like this tiny thing. It's not even the fact that he did it with a porn star. It's like, hey, he didn't classify the records in his books and accounting properly. So yeah, it's just kind of like a ridiculous whole thing. And like you're saying, like, people should be thinking about, like, what this means, right? What does it mean that you can have a president that literally killed a U.S. citizen without trial, and he's okay and he's venerated by all the right sorts of people, and then you have someone like Donald Trump who's not venerated by the right types of people, and he gets a felony based on the fact that he misclassified an entry in his ledger. It should make you think about who you support, why you support them, and how you view the establishment and the media. And like Donnie was saying, like, maybe you arrive at the same conclusion, but you'll be better off for it if you at least know and can make the claim yourself.
100%.
Cool. Well, friends, thank you so much for hanging with us. We also just appreciate you listening and watching us the past, what has it been? It's been almost 3 years now that we've been doing this. We're doing it a while. And this is just goodbye for a little bit, I think. We might be back doing this, but it's just hiatus, just so I can take care of some personal family stuff. And hopefully we'll see you guys again on a future episode. Take care.